Hello! I'm Miss Berg, and I'm going to be talking to you about commas. Specifically, commas after an introductory element. So, what is an introductory element? An introductory element is anything that starts off your sentence with something other than the main meat of the sentence. The main meat of the sentence being your subject and your verb, the what and what about it you're actually talking about in the sentence. So, let's say an introductory element is like an opening act to the main show. It spices up your sentences a little bit and makes it a little bit more interesting. It gets a little hype going before we get to the main part of the sentence. And it can contain really important information like when, where, how, why, under what conditions. The possibilities are endless. So, we know that introductory elements can be pretty important. What we need to focus on is that, like an opening act has an end to their performance, we need a comma after our introductory elements. Our comma is like the end to the stage, if you will. So, how do we know that something is an introductory element and not the main part of the sentence? Well, like I said before, an introductory phrase introduces the main part of the sentence, which is the subject and the verb. So, by that logic, you can't have an introductory phrase standing by itself because it's not actually a sentence. I mean, if you think about it, you wouldn't just walk up to somebody and say just an introductory phrase and leave them hanging, right? Hey, Austin.
Yeah?
When you're done with your game, so you can't just introduce something without finishing the main part of the sentence, right? Right. If you were paying attention to the way I said those things, the way I said the introductory element, you might have noticed that there's kind of a natural pause after an introductory element. This is way more evident, actually, if you read your sentences out loud in the sassiest way possible. You know, between you and Carla, I would choose you every time. If you can't handle me at my worst, you don't deserve me at my best. So, another quick indicator that you might be dealing with an introductory element rather than the sentence itself is something a guy named Jeff Anderson calls aubis. Yup, aubis. It's a mnemonic device. So, what it actually stands for are the words although, after, as, when, while, unless, before, because, if, and since. Now, I mentioned earlier that introductory elements often deal with when, where, why, how, under what condition, for what reason, those kind of additions to the sentence, those details. If you notice, the words in aubis, although, after, as, when, while, unless, before, because, if, since, all introduce that element, that when, what, where, etc. element. So, if your sentence starts with any of these words, it's a pretty good clue that you might be using a comma pretty soon. So we know what an introductory phrase is now, more or less. And we can sort of identify one. So why do we need a comma there at all, actually? Have you ever read like a really long sentence that seems to go on, and you kind of feel like you're getting lost? Because I have. On the other hand, have you read a sentence that seems to go on and is really long, but somehow you don't get lost? That's what commas are for. A comma tells your reader how to group phrases together in your sentences so they don't get lost. I've actually got a really good example where the comma is really important to help the reader stay on task during their reading. This is from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. So, if you notice, we start with the word when, so that gives us a nice clue that we're going to be dealing with an introductory phrase, right? That goes back to a woobis, right? So, the sentence starts when you're cruising down the road in the fast lane and you lazily sail past a few hard-driving cars and are feeling pretty pleased with yourself and then accidentally change down from fourth to first instead of third, thus making your engine leap out of your hood in a rather ugly mess. It tends to throw you off your stride in much the same way that this remark threw Ford Perfect off his. Alright, so obviously this sentence is about as much of a wreck as the car that the author is describing. It's very, very long. And the introductory phrase goes on basically forever. So what we have here is the introductory phrase. I've underlined it in blue. That whole thing is the introductory phrase. It is humongous. And then there, the green, that is our subject and verb, the actual sentence. If you did not have the comma, or if the author did not put the comma in here, this would be really hard to read because you get lost. This comma here, that comma, that's a really important comma. That comma lets the reader know, hey, you knew you were reading an introductory phrase, and this is where it ends. So, on an even more practical note, it keeps your reader from reading the whole sentence as one idea. Sometimes this happens when your introductory phrase ends in a noun, but the main sentence starts with something that looks like a verb, but isn't. Let's take a look at some examples to see how this works. Okay, let's take a look at these sentences. So we have, I'm so scared of dogs. When I see a dog, running is all I can think to do. When you were reading that second sentence, did you stumble? Because I did. Let's take a closer look at it. So we have, when I see a dog running is... Obviously, this is confusing. What we seem to have is two verbs. We have the verb running, so dog running, and then we have a second verb is, dog running is. That doesn't make any sense. When we go back to the main sentence, the full sentence, we know by the when, because of a woobis, that this is going to be an introductory phrase. The problem is we don't know when to end it because our author, our writer, didn't tell us when it ends. And not only did our author not tell us when the introductory phrase ended, they gave us a noun that was disguised as a verb. In this case, running is not a verb. It is the noun of the sentence. The is the verb, and the running is a noun. By putting this comma in the sentence, we're not only following rules of grammar, we are telling our reader exactly what they have to read in the way they have to read it. And this is very important because otherwise your reader is going to get really, really confused and frustrated. Okay, so I've given you a lot of information so far. Let's try putting it into practice. Here are some example sentences. I want you to take a few seconds to try and figure out where the comma would go. If a comma is needed, a comma may not always be needed. Alright, if you need more time, you can pause the video now to finish up. This is what I got from my commas. Check and make sure that your commas were in the same place. The reason for it are these introductory phrases. We have when I left for work, if I had $1 million, and as I woke up. The phrases afterwards have a subject and verb that's the main subject and verb of the sentence. He was playing, I would move, and I yawned. You can see the when, if, and as that were part of our woobis. The second one, however, it starts with when, but it's just a question. When will you hear about the job? That's not a when as in an introductory phrase when, that's just a when as in posing a question. So don't let that confuse you in the future. Okay, so that's all I've got for now, and I hope you've learned a few things about introductory elements, using commas with introductory elements, and maybe just using commas in general. I hope that this information has been useful to you, and I hope that you have all the best luck in your writing. Thank you for watching!